talk about Dubbo and the Regional Council. Matthew Dickerson, Mayor, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Good to be chatting to you, and always love to give you an update that's relevant, hopefully to the wider region as well as just to the Dubbo Regional Council residents.
Now, I'm going to start at the bottom of the list, if you don't mind. We'll get to the good news what should be some good news at the end. But I don't know. It's my opinion. I don't know if the new Dubbo Bridge is the way to go, but you were there with a shovel in hand.
I'll reserve my opinion on anything about the bridge. It's something that's not involving local government. It's a state government project helping with some funding from the federal government, but it's happening. It's the River Street Bridge, and for some reason it's now called the new Dubbo Bridge, which is a funny name to call something. How long does something stay the new whatever until it becomes the old whatever? They'll come up with a much better name for it, I'm sure, at some stage in the future. But everyone just calls it the River Street Bridge. I think there's been some negativity associated with the River Street Bridge name, which is why they're probably not calling it the River Street Bridge. But it's happening. The first sods were turned on Friday last week. Mark Colton was there, Dougal Saunders, obviously the state member, was there, I was there, a number of other officials were there as well from Transport for New South Wales. So there's a couple of different projects. People familiar with the area where it comes onto River Street will know that there's a funny little dogleg where Darling Street and Brisbane Street join up to River Street. So that's one of the first projects they'll do. They'll fix it up to make that a proper intersection. They'll start driving some pylons into the ground where the bridge will go, and there'll be more test pylons to see how the construction of the earth is underneath those pylons will go. So you're not about to see a bridge pop out, but you'll start to see some construction work happening down there. Not all the tenders have been let for the whole bridge project yet. Only some of these first tenders have been let out for that at this stage. But again, it's one of those things, some people talk to local government, talk to myself, talk to other councillors and said, please stop it, we don't like it. It's not a project that we control at all. It's a state government project. We can either jump up and down with excitement about it or say it's the worst thing ever and it won't make any difference because the state government will do what they will do with their planning. So we just have to accept it. It's in our city. It'll be an injection of funds into our city during the construction phase. It'll be another high-level bridge crossing across the river, and we'll just sit back and let the construction go on.
All right. And would you like to see a bypass around Dubbo?
Definitely, and we've also got some resolutions from council where we've asked money from state and federal government to do a business case on that type of bypass. One of the really interesting parts about the River Street Bridge, or the new Dubbo Bridge, is that even though it's a high-level bridge which keeps it above the river in terms of flood, the unfortunate part is the entrances don't stay above the river in terms of flood. So when you do get flooding, at both the entrance on the north side, or if you like, the east of the river, and the entrance on the west of the river, both go underwater. So the only way you achieve the flood-free crossing is by having a detour on the west side and a detour on the north side, or again, it's the east side of the river typically. So you've got detours required on both sides to get around the floodwaters to then get onto the bridge which sits up above the river. And I suppose that's one of the issues that people have had with that particular bridge, is that if you're going to have a flood-free crossing, have a flood-free crossing, not one that involves detours on both sides.
All right, moving on to fluoride or lack of fluoride in water.
This is an incredibly disappointing area, and I have apologised to the community on numerous occasions already. In January 2019, 3.5 years ago, Rod, there was a failure of the fluoride tank. There was a leak in the fluoride tank at our water treatment facility in Dubbo. And so we couldn't keep putting fluoride in the water. Some work was done. Some consultants were brought in at that time to look at what needed to be done. Reports were sent off to the upper levels of management of council for that work to be rectified, for the problem to be fixed as such. Reports were sent off to New South Wales Health to inform them that there was no fluoride being put in our water at that stage. But council didn't inform the public. And furthermore, they didn't fix the problem. Here we are 3.5 years later. I only found out about this problem recently. And of course, what we've now done is we've told the public, and talking to you is exactly part of that solution or part of that process to inform the public. So for the last 3.5 years, no fluoride has been put in the water. That's very disappointing. The lack of communication is incredibly disappointing. The lack of any emphasis to repair the problem is disappointing. We've now committed to the public that, first of all, we're telling the public, but secondly, we'll have that problem fixed. It will take some time to actually fix the problem because we've got a fair bit of work to do to fix up that issue, and that'll be fixed, we say, to the public by June next year. Hopefully quicker than that, but there's a fair bit of work to do to scope up the solution and actually go through and fund it, etc. So very disappointing, and I apologise to the community, but we'll get about fixing that problem now.
All right, it is a shame because that would increase people's dentist bills.
Well, quite possibly. And I suppose the thing that really disappoints me about that is what you've said there is definitely right, potentially, but more importantly, communities should have trust in their council to do what they say they're going to do. The Fluoridation of Public Water Supplies Act 1957, number 58, 6B, says that if you've told the community you're putting fluoride in the water, if you've got that agreement, then you cannot just stop putting fluoride in the water. It's a breach of that act if you stop putting fluoride in the water. So there's a huge breach of the trust that the community would have in its council to do what it says it's going to do. And in fact, in terms of breaching the act, that's a huge breach of the trust that the community has in its council. So that's what really disappoints me the most, is that there hasn't been that open and transparent communication with the public to let the public know what's happening.
We're speaking with Matthew Dickerson, Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, and you have a pipeline, a $5 million pipeline. What's happening with it?
Nothing. And that's another disappointment from this last council. During the drought resilience process, there was $30 million given to council to do a range of projects, and they did a range of projects. Most of those were pretty reasonable projects, put some more bores in, put some more pipelines. They had a great idea to take treated effluent water from our sewage treatment plant and bring that across to our sporting fields to use that water on the sporting fields so that water we were using there, such as bore water, could then be used in our water treatment plant. So that makes sense. Unfortunately, there's a fair bit of work you've got to do before you can use treated effluent anywhere near an aquifer or anywhere near a river. They knew that, and I've actually read reports that talked about the fact they would need to get approvals from the state government to use that. Many experts said there was no way they'd get approvals for that water to be used because you couldn't just put treated effluent above an aquifer where it would potentially go into the aquifer, then be drawn up by the bores in the water treatment, and then people would be drinking it. So effectively, people would be drinking treated effluent. Unfortunately, they didn't get any approvals. They built the pipeline, 13.2 kilometres, about $5 million in round numbers, and then when council wanted to put treated effluent in there, DPE from the state government said, you cannot use that water over an aquifer. You need to treat that to a much higher level if you're going to use it, and that would be ridiculous because the level you would have to do to treat it would cost $9 million for the treatment process, and then you'd have the most expensive, best quality water in Dubbo to be brought across to put on some sporting fields. So a major failure by the last council, and $5 million in the ground that can't be used.
Truth. EV, you got some new charges going in?
Well, not yet, but hopefully we will have. We've put some grants in, there's some co-funding available from the state government for some grants for EV chargers. We've picked a priority list of where we'd like them to go first. Wellington Library is our number one priority, right in the centre of the CBD in Wellington. Wellington Caves, Sir Road and Cutler Park on the Newell Highway, Elizabeth Park up near the Japanese Gardens, and then the visitor information centres at Dubbo and Wellington. And it'd be great to see EV chargers there, and people will use them as they travel through, but people also do EV charger tourism. When you've got an EV, you're just so excited about having it, right, that you want to get out and drive it more, and what you do is logically you drive it to places where there are EV chargers. So if we've got more EV chargers, we'll have the ability to get some of that tourism.
And a saving of $100,000 with green power?
This is a contract that we've just secured for our small sites, what we call our small sites electricity. So we've got some large sites that use lots of electricity. We have them under one tender process, but we've just awarded our small sites tender. And believe it or not, by going to the green power with Shell Energy Retail Proprietary Limited, we've cut that bill back to about $810,000, which you're spot on. It's a saving of over $100,000. Now, that's an indicative cost because obviously usage can go up and down, but basing that on previous year's usage, that's the sort of bill that we're paying. So it's a lot of money we pay for electricity, but saving $100,000 by going to their green power option, I think is good for the environment. It's council sending the right message to the community that this is important, but it also saves money. And that's where I think people are missing this point, that going to renewable power, and that's 100% renewable power that we'll be using there on those small sites, going to renewable power long term is going to be more cost effective.
And out of some bad news, some good news is coming. A Disability Access Committee to be re-established.
Yeah, that's right. This is a committee that was established several years ago on council because there was an allocation of approximately $2 million put aside for better disability access in the CBD of Dubbo. When this new council came along, we reformed a whole range of committees that had disappeared. About 16 new committees were created to make sure we had that consultation with the community. When councillors looked at the previous Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee, we realised that the budget had been spent. There was no money to be spent, so it was almost a bit of a false hope having a disability committee with no money to spend. But the community told us loud and clear that they thought that disability committee was incredibly important. So councillors, to their credit, to our credit, listened to the community, and at the council meeting last night, Councillor Pam Wells moved a motion to reform that Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. That was well supported by councillors based on that feedback from the community. So that committee has now been reformed as of last Thursday. It's now a matter of going out, finding some members for that committee. And the real challenge for us now in terms of that committee and council is we'll come up with some great ideas, some things to do in the community. Getting the budget, getting the funding for that will be the real challenge. And once we identify some of those things, we'll go out and keep looking for some of that money from maybe state and federal government. But it is a good example of where councillors can make changes based on feedback from the community.
Mayor, I thank you for your time today.
My pleasure, Rod. Good to be chatting.